Hello?
Just one more.
Hello, thank you. Your presentation this morning, at first I was tempted to ask maybe some persnickety technical questions, but I think I'd rather just ask a general question. In your presentation, in your work in general, how much do you think is a matter of the science itself, as it were, telling you? How much comes from the science itself versus, say, your own theological interpretation of the science? I know that's maybe a problematic question, but I'd like to ask it. And also for Matthew Fox, I recently picked up a copy of Tolstoy's The Gospel in Brief. I'm just wondering if that's something you'd recommend, at least as a starting point to engage with the gospel. So thank you.
So the question of the science itself. So the term science itself is rather elusive, since this new science of evolution, whether it's evolution or quantum physics, these are sciences that are constantly being revised. In other words, there's still, various interpretations of all these things. So I try to take the consensus of interpretation and what correlates with, in a sense, theological insights, so that we can begin to make sense by a way of correlation, that what we proclaim by faith, we can, in a sense, make some sense of in terms of science. My own methodology begins with science. In other words, what is science telling us about nature? In other words, what's the best consensus right now? Without going through all the various interpretations of quantum physics or all the various interpretations of biological evolution. And there are a lot. I mean, it is a gamut. But science is like theology on the academic side, right? You have a lot of different schools of things. But there's a consensus of story around things and here's what the consensus of story means to me. If it connects with our experience, and there is an experience, we can speak of an experience of evolution in terms of a complexification. We know that the world in 2019 is not the world from 1955. It's a very different type of world, only because information has really, in a sense, wired us in a certain way that we didn't have this type of connectivity in 1955. We didn't know about world religion to the way we do today. We didn't know about various ethnicities or cultures. So we can say there's been a shift in our consciousness due to informational flow. So that's one way of looking. If we want to interpret evolution as a rise to complexity, that's one way to, in a sense, understand it. So that's when I use science, that's what I'm doing. I'm using aspects of it in order to make sense of our experience of the world, and then from the point of faith, what God may be doing in light of this, in this experience. So it's a way of, it's bridging science and theology. And it's always for me, it's always within the context of interpretation. It's an interpretation to create meaning. It's a meaningful story for our experience of where we are, without trying to be factual or trying to resolve any one of the scientific paradigms that are out there on these things.
I'm not familiar with that one particular book by Tolstoy that you mentioned, but I do love Tolstoy. He's the one who converted Gandhi, or introduced Gandhi to real Christianity, and Gandhi ran with it, like few Christians have. So for that alone, Tolstoy should be praised. But there's one writer who said about his War and Peace, he said, "This is how life would speak if life could speak." And I think that's what made me fall in love with that book, or had that mystical experience, that I too found it so full of what life is about. And of course, it's so wonderful to kind of end on that note here in the GladdeningLight Symposium, because Tolstoy is one of the great artists. And so what your question to me is really, it could be translated, what do the artists have to give in this whole project and process? And they have to give so much. And science is important, but art is equally important, because the artists stir the heart. They tell the story in a way that makes it memorable, that makes you can't run from it. And of course, I don't mean just novelists, I mean filmmakers and I mean dramatists and musicians and all the arts. They play such an essential role in our survival, in the nurturing of our souls, and in the telling of these stories. So it's very important that the artists get hold of the scientific story today, of the new creation story, and turn it into the kind of colorful and delicious and memorable, unforgettable stories that our children need to hear about their value, about how the universe yearned for them to be here for 13.7 billion years. And now it is our job as elders to be telling these stories. That is the primary job of the elder, to tell the stories that will make the young people strong and motivated. And part of telling the story is letting the institutions that are dying, let them die. And give, as one of Jesus' greatest lines was, let the dead bury the dead. And that was radical as hell for a Jew, because a Jew who dies is supposed to be buried that day. Same with the Muslims. Well, when you live in a desert country, you figure it out. But the point is that you have to have a certain nose today for what's dying. You have to be reading the signs of the times or smelling the signs of the time. There's a certain putridness that is rising from many of our dead, dying, as you said, patriarchal institutions that are dying, and not at all gracefully. But the big thing is to put your energy into the new shoots, what comes next. One of the stories I love from Brian Swim is this. He says, when the dinosaurs were running around, especially in their last era, the last years, there were these little tiny shrew-like things running around too. So the asteroid comes and kills all the big shots, all the big dinosaurs, and the little running around shrews are there. These are our ancestors. These were the first mammals. So we should be investing in those little things that are running around, the alternative forms of calming the reptilian brain, of demonstrating compassion, of bringing medicine back to its real and full meaning, of well-being. And all our professions, law, economics, business, politics, religion, all of them have to return. All of them need to die and be reborn, just like Jesus said. The seed has to die for things to be born. It's not just a personal, individual teaching. It's about cultural institutions, too. Death has its place. There's a great line in Rome, where there's death, there's hope. That's learned from centuries of living with popes and cardinals. It's an old saying, born of gritty experience.
I would just say very simply, without expounding too much, just live in the chaos of the moment. We need to learn to love chaos. I was thinking about your question before. We're not going to arrive at the resolve of our problems. Every problem that's ended, a new one will arise. We just know more today because that information is more available to us. I think we need to learn to live in the in-between without trying to resolve one side to the other. And maybe that, that is that constant death-life thing that Matt is talking about here. The other thing with consumerism, learn to love what we are and what we have. Consumerism is like, oh, you don't have this. This will make you smarter and beautiful and more pretty. And it's like, no, you have it already, So learn to love what we already have. As my mother, Ilia Delio, would say, happiness is wanting what you already have. So I'd like to maybe end this evening really with a tribute to Mary Oliver, really the poet of the simple, the particular, the now, in which the beauty of all life radiates. So in her work, fabulous poem, my work is loving the world. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums, here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still not half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. The Phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture, which is mostly rejoicing since all ingredients are here, which is gratitude, to be given a mind and a heart and these body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren, to the sleepy dug-up clam, telling them all over and over how it is that we live forever.